JT, do you want to introduce your panel? We've got a panel coming up from you next. Let me just get my magic buttons to work properly. We've got a fantastic panel actually coming up next. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you're going to dive into, and then we'll bring the panelists into play?
Yeah, no, I mean, the key here is, right, is, we want to talk about the why. Like, okay, so yay, open caching. Why? Like, why is it important? Why should the industry be embracing it? Why should we all be like, yes, this is a good thing. This is good for everybody. That's what I want the panel to focus in on. We'll talk some about technologies as well, but just to introduce everybody, we've got three great panelists. We'll start out. We've got Eric Klein, and I'll let them talk a little bit about themselves for a second. But Eric Klein from Disney Streaming Services. We've got Josh Chesarek from StackPath, and we've got Dan Newman from Viasat. So let's start out. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I mean, it was so nice. If you were going to do the intros, I was all set to let you just do it. Would be great. So I'm Eric Klein. I'm Director of Content Distribution over at Disney Streaming Services, focusing on Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and all the other partners that we work with. Formerly part of the BAMTech and MLBAM team, so I've been in the space. Prior to working there, I've been in the space for a while, also working at Limelight Networks. In addition to my day job working for Disney Streaming Services, I also am the co-chair of the Open Caching Working Group. So JT gets to deal with my emails quite a lot of, hey, what's the latest on this project or that project? Have you heard about this company and where they're at? Certainly happy and looking forward to talk a lot more about some of the open caching things. And JT, I appreciate your summary that you just did on like the status of where all of our documents were. I might take that recording and just splice it into some stuff I'm doing on this side.
Perfect. So, I can see the deck too. Awesome. Let's hear from Josh. Josh, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Josh Chesarek from StackPath. I've been in the CDN industry now for about 10 years, originally with Highwinds, now StackPath. And during that time, I've worked extensively in support, operations, and really just trying to make the internet work as best it can. As we all know, it can be a little bit traumatic and problematic at times, which is why things like Open Cache are really cool. So definitely interested in talking a little bit more about that today.
Fantastic. And then last but definitely not least, Dan, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, JT. Like JT said, I'm Dan Newman. I'm the head of our content delivery service here at Viasat. Just to tell you a little bit about Viasat, because it's slightly less well known, we're an ISP, and we deliver high-speed, high-quality internet from space. So we use satellites to do that, and we operate in many verticals. So we have fixed services where we provide residential internet. We actually work with commercial airlines, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, and we also have a community internet initiative. And we're in the process of trying to deliver terabits from space. In terms of my role, it's really about improving the quality of experience at the same time as using or decreasing the number of bits, or using as few bits as possible at the same time as raising quality. And that's where open caching is a really good match for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting, when you guys made the Thibeault announcement, was it earlier this year? It was very interesting, right? Because it was the first sort of, implementation somebody had done of actually building, some of these open caching technologies. And so I want to get to that, but let's start out a little bit, sort of kind of answering that why. And maybe Eric, maybe you can jump in here, and obviously Dan and Josh, clearly, come in and talk about that as well. But, Eric, what's driving open caching? Why do we need it?
Yeah, it's a great question, JT. It's one of those things that, we do get asked by some of our partners before they come on board or before they join the working group, kind of not only the what of the story, but also why, what's the value within the industry, an industry where there already are content delivery networks, there already are network operators that have their own transparent caches, and content providers that are even getting into the space. And, I always come back to two main reasons. The first one, as a content provider, purely selfishly, as we grow and scale, it becomes harder and harder to deliver content in a consistent manner across a bunch of different networks, whether it be content delivery networks or open cache networks themselves. And to push for those standards and those compliances with media as the specificity of it and at the center of what we do, it really is not possible without the work that we're doing as part of the Open Caching Working Group and as part of the work that's done with the standards that the Open Caching framework has laid down. The second thing is, if I take a step back and look at the broader view, if I'm a network operator or a content delivery network, my goal is ultimately to be part of an ecosystem that improves my end customer performance and also enables me to gain more and more access to the insight of what flows over my network. So from a network operator standpoint, it behooves you to be part of that ecosystem of distribution so that your content's not just coming off a transit onto your network to your end user, but potentially flowing onto caches on your network so that you have less back and forth going off your network during times of peak traffic, and you can deliver more content from those local caches. And then as a content distribution network, or CDN, the goal being to ultimately avoid the challenge and the questions that you have from content providers like myself who say, well, I'm looking for the best performance possible. How do you get the best performance possible? Ultimately have your caches on net with certain providers to augment your distribution strategy from your central core distribution. So those twofold approaches enables you to optimize delivery. And those are just two of the multitude of reasons that I kind of always go into all of our meetings thinking of, what are we going to work on next for the open cache environment and through the Open Caching Working Group. I know I'm working quite a lot with Dan. I don't know, Dan, if you had anything to add from kind of the network operator side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things to build on what Eric said, and maybe it dovetails into the edge story for us, is that sort of middle mile or the core networking infrastructure in the ISP is a point where we need to optimize, but there are a lot of other cases when the challenge goes beyond just that part of the network. So if you look at networks that have speed limits such as DSL, or you look at networks that have usage limits like wireless, or even unfortunately in this COVID time, we had a lot of content service providers that had to lower their speeds because of congestion on the network. And what the Edge Storage Project is about is extending that open caching concept. It's pretty much the same concept, or it is the same concept. We just need to bring some additional management to the home concept. But by leveraging the unit in the home as another node in the open caching network, we can really offload not just upstream infrastructure, but the access network itself. Instead of the last mile, maybe we're talking about like the last foot, as it were, getting to end user devices. So that's where we see this whole concept of this interconnect, this open approach, where it's not about this level of integration isn't about necessarily about the own content that you produce, but any of the over the top relationships an ISP has with content service providers can be optimized at good quality.
Josh, any thoughts to add, from the CDN perspective? How do you guys feel about open caching and participating in that?
So really looking at open caching, random caching servers have been out there since the dawn of the internet. So as we deal with those right now, I can't tell you how many times that's been a headache to deal with the fact of someone saying, there's stale files, there's corruption, any number of things, only to figure out that they weren't actually talking to the CDN, but rather some intermediary cache. Obviously, some providers, the solution with that is move over to SSL, so nobody can get in the middle, but it does then lose the optimizations that are being talked about here. And I know the COVID is the no-no word of the day. So with that being said, right now, any sort of thing that can help optimize the delivery and get it to where it needs to be to help with that end user performance that, Eric is talking about, we need to figure out how to help that work out and then make sure that the experience is effectively seamless so that when somebody comes time to say, hey, this file should no longer be cached, we need to purge it, that actually goes out and doesn't cause an issue versus, old school methodology of saying, all right, time to version the file and make it new, versus someone being able to invalidate it and say, actually, I do have that new version of the file, and not have to waste that bandwidth, interconnect again. So really just looking at those sorts of things are why, I think from CDN's perspective, we want to figure out how to make that sort of thing work well with what we're doing today.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And Dan, you had mentioned something about sort of, the home and the edge. I'm wondering if you talk a little bit sort of like what's the point of extending the open caching concept down into the home gateway? I mean, and maybe it's to Josh's point right there, and even to Eric's point that it's like closer to the end user better. But can you talk a little bit about that project?
Absolutely. There's multiple reasons to do it. So if I just extend on those sort of problem statements in my earlier comment for speed limited networks, well, you're not going to get UHD experiences unless we can get that content to you at another point in time when the network isn't the bottleneck for delivering it to you. For service providers with usage limits, it's a little bit more about just being able to watch lots more content. That's what people use the internet for. They want to stream this content. This sort of unlocks that in an unlimited way without hindering your other experiences. And then and those two things, we're talking about raising quality and raising the amount of consumption. That's really what everybody, essentially what everybody wants. By having it in the home, you are eliminating those other access network challenges. In the U.S., there's still almost 20 million homes that have DSL or fixed wireless services for their internet. So not all homes, even in the U.S. here, have fiber and cable, and that varies across the globe in terms of the access technologies. So there's a lot of opportunities for improving the experience.
Now, what are some of the other use cases? I mean, I know things like download to go and things like becoming popular. Will this address that?
Download to go, I would view as sort of a companion to the home storage. I guess for home storage, we're a little bit focused on the living room because the home storage is really the only solution that uniquely addresses that. Download to go is an excellent solution, but it focuses on mobile devices, and that can help you in the home as well as out of the home. And so I think there's another companion piece that's going to be related to download to go, where we're obviously going to want to make sure the home caching and the download to go are compatible, but we're a bit more focused on the devices that aren't trusted to download, the end user devices that aren't trusted to download a copy of it. We want to bring that into the home.
That makes sense. And do you imagine? Do you envision storage on the home gateway or something?
Yeah, that was the next thing. We talked about it. It's not exactly clear home gateway is the best name for it because it kind of confuses that it could be on your modem, but it could be in your set-top box. Like the whole purpose of a set-top box is to store video content. Why is it only limited to the stuff that comes over the air or over the cable on the standard TV? Or maybe there's a model where you buy a network access storage device and it also has open caching capabilities in it. You can use it for your own backup services, but you can use it to optimize. So we're viewing it as a software module that any equipment maker in the home could add this as a capability. So I think there's a lot of we're kind of talking about the home gateway. It does emphasize that it's in the home, but I think it's a little too narrow in terms of all the different places the storage could be.
Oh, that makes total sense. So Eric, thinking about kind of what Dan was talking about and the sort of on the horizon, what else is on the horizon for the open caching working group? Like, what do you guys see as kind of the big things you want to attack next?
You kind of addressed some of them before I was listening in on the recap, but I did want to just circle back on what Dan was talking about a little bit. We've tackled edge storage as part of the open caching working group before and tried to find different ways to engage with it as a topic. And I think the approach we're taking now is, to Dan's point, kind of broken into two. One that where we're looking at it almost as just another extension of taking the open cache network placement that would normally be within an internet service provider's network, and just moving it even closer to the end user, right? It's in their home now. And the other component of it, the download to go component that might make it a little bit more difficult to solve that issue, really dividing the two, putting one on the network provider side, more optimized for the network provider, one more on the content provider side and the benefits the content provider can gain, and approaching them from two different angles. So that's one way that we finally kind of, within the open caching working groups, the subgroup that we have around the edge storage side, really been able to open that up as a topic of conversation and explore it within all of our different meetings. As for what we're working on right now, I think there's two major themes. The first one is really about interoperability. So APIs and interoperability is the big driving theme of what we've been doing for the last 6 months or so, focusing on developing standards, API, configuration APIs, capacity APIs, ways to communicate that also directly lead into the SVA labs work that we do. So giving us real functional output to add on top of the workflows and the best practices that we've laid out in the past. In addition, the other area that we're really focusing in is extending our work with the IETF to try to find better standard approaches to things, right? HTTP3 is coming, as you mentioned before, Quick is coming. Ways that those are part of the video streaming workflow. In many ways, they've been designed with video streaming now in mind. What are areas that those cross sections will benefit from and be a part of the open caching environment? How can we look at different components of Quick and the security components that are there, and how might that impact the overall framework of adding it into the request routing workflow? So revisiting again the old formats and the old specifications, but this time with an eye towards the standards and with an eye towards working with the IETF based on some of the new stuff that have just been accepted back in to recently ratified documents, as you mentioned before.
No, that's great. And, Josh, I was wondering, maybe you can talk a little bit about this. I know that StackPath, you guys are, relatively new members to the SVA, right? So you're really just kind of getting used to the formats of the working groups and sort of starting to understand all the documents that are in play and where things are going. From a CDN perspective, is there something, maybe one or two or three things or whatever that you feel that open caching should really focus on in order to bring that interoperability to the CDN and sort of the way you guys deliver content?
I think you guys have pretty much nailed the ones that I would normally be paying attention to, which is really the consistency, having the interoperability through the APIs to be able to ensure that from configuration to state effectively, that those are consistent between not only just one CDN, because pretty much any large scale event provider, OTT platform, they're not going to use just one CDN, they're going to use multiple. So having that ability to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and then also on the feedback loop, which I was looking through some of those documentations and, being able to get that feedback with the logging so that we're able to see what's going on at the other end. So having that, and then having effectively just that effective, an open standard, if you will, really is the kind of the key things that we look for when we're trying to figure out what can we do. Obviously, if we're going to implement something, we want to make sure that it's got the best chance to work with other folks, other providers, how it's going to work, and it's actually something that our customers can utilize and benefit from. So having it open is really the way to go with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that that's something that, Disney streaming services has made a big point about. It's like, hey, we want to work with, delivery partners who are, supporting of open caching and supporting of open standards. We want to make sure that people, it's like, who wants something proprietary? Because then you're stuck with that. It's like, now I've got multiple proprietary things. So that makes total sense to hear you, to hear you guys say that. Maybe Eric, I want to talk about two things. I want to talk a little bit about a use case. So, Dan, I want to get to the sort of Thibeault TV, but Eric, I know that you guys are, kind of experimenting with open caching, in your delivery workflows. Can you talk a little bit about, any of the sort of, performance that you've seen or anything that you've seen from those tests?
Yeah, I can give some high levels, just rough numbers in terms of things without going too far into detail. So we're working with a couple of different providers in the space, both as part of our group in the work in the Open Caching Working Group, and then just at Disney Streaming as part of our kind of Open Cache Standard Initiative, to your point. And two major data points that stand out to us. One, in running recent tests, what we tend to find is that our average bit rate, which is high to begin with within the workflow that we use, just based on the quality of content we deliver, jumps roughly 10% when we use an open cache framework and network. But when you're talking in the 2-digit range for megabits per second, it's quite a sizable jump to even get a little bit of an improvement there. And then in addition, this is the area that really stands out to me, in addition to that jump in bitrate quality, we also see a 40% to anywhere from 30 to 40%, sometimes as low as 20, but still a 20 to 40% improvement in connection use rebuffer ratio, which is a data point that we take very seriously here to look at customer performance. And so seeing a dip in the customer experience having to measure up and jump up to those higher bit rates, and also seeing a higher average bit rate for the customers for their sessions, really tells us we're onto something, right? You want that peak performance and as little disruptive playback experience as possible for users. Not every session is going to be perfect. It can't be. There's network that you don't control, to Josh's point before, but you can really do your best to optimize that experience for end users. And I think we're onto something there. I know you mentioned Dan. I guess, Dan, I'll hand it off to you if you want to talk a little bit about the use cases you guys have done so far.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear about sort of, because, again, Dan, when you guys announced the Thibeault TV thing earlier this year, you built an open caching implementation when there was just paper.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Obviously, we're equally excited about it. So what we did there, and I saw there was a sort of a question in the chat there about live. So we demonstrated with an over-the-top live TV feed, the Thibeault Sportsnet. We integrated their delivery pipeline with our open caching implementation. So we became essentially their CDN on our network. But we also did something else, not open caching, but we actually used multicast ABR between our ground open caching node and our edge open caching node on the aircraft. So what this allows us to do, if you think of it in terms of like just eliminating the redundancy, right? If you had users on aircraft, you had 20 people on 20 different planes, you'd have to send this thing 400 times. But if those planes are all in the same broadcast domain or in the same spot beam, you only have to send it once. So you get the multicast benefit there, plus you get the caching benefit of the nodes on the aircraft. So we think that's obviously a really good use of these specs that, although I don't think we published anything on multicast ABR in the Streaming Video Alliance. It definitely was discussed, and there are other publications on that already. But what open caching allowed us to do was to just use standard HTTP unicast as our interfaces, both upstream to the content provider's origin or their mid-tier, whatever they prefer. And then for the user agent talking to our local caching server on the aircraft, neither of those devices know the difference, right? But we happen to be running our own version of multicast ABR because we have our own slightly different access network than most. And it all, just every segment had the right types of specifications around interoperability, and it was good. It worked really well. So
I'm excited to sort of see it, I guess, in a little more production. I mean, because obviously you guys announced it, and then travel kind of went to
yeah.
But we're seeing that pick up again. So I'm sure, it will be more applicable again as people start traveling more, watching more content on the plane. But
yeah, I still think you just add, just as we've seen, I guess there was something about some buzzword I'm not supposed to say, but during this time, live sports is still this killer app, right? And so if we can bring live sports into these environments where you're kind of trapped there for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours, we think that's just very compelling.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, so it looks like we've got about 5 minutes left, and I want to get to some questions. So we've got a couple of questions. Again, we've got them in different chat panels. One of them is Michael Dale asked, is open caching more applicable to live streaming or big VOD release events? So I guess just think like Game of Thrones, right? I guess maybe Eric, can you sort of take a whack at that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, on our Disney streaming side, we handle both VOD with Disney Plus and live with ESPN Plus. And from our standpoint, in designing the open caching workflows as part of what we do today through the SVA, it can work for either workflow. It really all depends on the architecture on the back end of the open caching partners. So in some of the experimental environments that we've looked at, we have a very limited amount of parent cache. And so those scenarios and those setups with partners that have limited parent cache leads to live really being the optimal use case and workflow there. But because of the design and the architecture of how we've kind of set up request routing in the open caching documentation, a CDN can act as the parent for an open cache node. In many ways, it's recommended. And so in the scenario where CDN connects as a parent for the open cache node, you can serve VOD just as easily. Right? The open cache node is the source of the really popular VOD content. Some of the less popular VOD content lives on those on the CDN edges, and the CDN's delivering and distributing through those open cache nodes. And ultimately, on the content provider side, you're getting the real long tail requests back to you. So it can work for either setup, and it's been designed in such a way that once the connection's established to the user, there's no real change, and it just depends on whatever they're watching, trying to optimize consumption for it.
No, I mean, and that makes sense. Before I jump to the next question, one of the things I wanted to ask Josh, again, so, you sort of represent as the CDN representation on this panel. I kind of want to understand a little bit, obviously you've got open caching over here and we've got a lot of CDN representation on it, and I'm sure StackPath is going to be sort of, starting to come and join those conversations. But what are some of the things that you guys are working on CDN wise, to improve delivery of content, and sort of the delivery experience? Are there some like next gen things that you're really working on? I wonder how those might dovetail into some of the things that, that open caching is doing.
So the crazy next gen stuff I can't necessarily talk about, but when we look at that stuff, it's really about the optimization, because even if it's necessarily not the thing that the CDN might want to do, if it's what our customers want, that kind of prevails. So being able to figure out, our kind of going back to the beginning with our CDN technology, it's really been around optimization and trying to make sure that we do as little extra work as possible. So being able to recognize this is a popular piece of content, it should stay at the edge as close to the end users as possible and cache at that point in time, versus this is effectively a one-time event, one-hit wonder, something that doesn't need to stick around inside that cache. And Eric was talking about, depending on the type of nodes you have at various places, you might have different levels of caching ability in terms of being able to say, okay, we want to keep around that long tail because it makes sense, so that we don't have to keep working with, utilizing the network between wherever our CDN edges are and the end users who are viewing. And then also just even when we can scale, we've definitely seen certain situations and geographies where the interconnect and backhaul is missing. So on a couple of the panels earlier today, people have been talking about 5G and all the other methods, which has really opened up the bandwidth on the user side, and talking about the interconnects, underground, sea, fiber, et cetera, which we use for like backbone and everything. But if the backhaul isn't there, it doesn't really matter that there's tons of availability of bandwidth on one side or the other. So that the efficiencies is really where we're looking at a lot of items to be able to smartly deliver the bits that need to be delivered at the right time and not waste tons of time delivering things that aren't going to be reutilized, et cetera.
That's very interesting because I mean it's it's something that I've heard a lot about from network operators. As CDNs terminate content on their network and they're forced to backhaul all of this content through their network, they're like, how do we fix this? And yeah, 5G doesn't fix that, but caches at the edge can really help. So yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so I think we are out of time. So I just want to say thank you guys. That was awesome. I really appreciate it. Good discussion. Looking forward to more stuff that the Open Caching Working Group is going to do in the future. So I'll turn it back over to Dom.
Jason, Dan, Josh, Eric, thank you so much. That was a deeply technical and deeply interesting session, and it was a perfect after lunch moment to get us focused back in on video and so on. I did have some more questions, but we will run late if we do that, so I might just keep that for the networking after or put those in on email.